In 2012, Anita Sarkeesian announced the Kickstarter campaign for her new video series, which would take a critical eye to video game tropes from an explicitly feminist point of view, titled Tropes vs. Women in Video Games. Chances are, if you're watching this video, you've probably heard about this before, and to be honest, you're probably sick of hearing about it. I am too. I actually had to give a presentation that started with this very same topic, but it needs to be addressed because the results of the Kickstarter campaign were a sort of canary in the coal mine for the overarching topic of this video, which is how gaming culture maintains male dominance. The Kickstarter campaign that Anita launched for her Tropes vs. Women in Video Games series brought with it a very strong wave of harassment towards Anita, which died down for a couple of years until a new wave of harassment began with the Gamergate controversy. Gamergate is difficult to talk about for quite a few reasons. The first is that people who were there to see it go down or even participate in it to this day have conflicting explanations of what they think happened or what they think should be taken away from it. The second reason is that it's still controversial to this day, and poking at the fire will inevitably cause backlash no matter what perspective I come at it from. The third reason is that, for a lot of people, this is beating a dead horse. Most people who know about Gamergate don't want to talk about it anymore. Indeed, when we frame Gamergate in terms of politics, there's very little left to say that hasn't already been said loudly and at great length. A lot of people would prefer to just sweep it under the rug altogether, for better or for worse. But for sociological analysis, we don't have that option, because what Gamergate can tell us about the sociological insight into not only gaming culture, but also culture as a whole is too valuable to dismiss. So while this particular video isn't going to be extensively about Gamergate, I am going to at times discuss Gamergate and the implications that Gamergate has on gaming culture. I'm going to link in the description 3 very good videos on the topic, one by Innuendo Studios, one by Folding Ideas, and one by Noah Gervais, all of which go into Gamergate more extensively and more exclusively than I will here. If you don't know anything about Gamergate and want to know more, please watch those videos for reference. So why do I want to begin with discussing Anita Sarkeesian's Kickstarter campaign in particular? Because that was an instance where a woman was dragged through the mud, harassed, threatened, and bullied in an attempt to prevent her from little more than basic feminist analysis of common video game tropes. It's entirely possible that she could have been wrong about every last thing she said in her videos. It's also entirely possible that she could be a fake gamer because she entered into gaming culture as a quote-unquote outsider. She could even have been deliberately trying to ruin games for men by feminizing them. None of this is true, but it all could be true and it'd still be irrelevant because the end result, her getting harassed to such a severe degree, is entirely unwarranted. The fact that large droves of gamers, predominantly men, would go to such extreme lengths as we saw against Anita in 2012 or against both Anita and Zoe Quinn during the Gamergate controversy in 2014, all under the name of protecting some facet of gaming culture, provokes questions about what gaming culture even is exactly. So before I can get into gaming culture as a bigger picture, I want to first talk about what gaming culture means to me. Close people in my life, and also close followers of my channel, know that I'm quite experienced when it comes to gaming. I've been playing games my whole life, starting from playing Doom when I was 2 years old. I have several consoles and have featured some of these consoles in at least a couple of my videos. And given my videos on Half-Life and the Doom series, it's very easy to spot that I'm more than just a little knowledgeable about games themselves. Close friends also know that I could probably kick your ass when it comes to games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero, Ninja Gaiden on NES, or old school Doom. And that highlights in a positive manner what gaming culture can be. Gaming culture, for me, helped create a sense of belonging through childhood experiences of playing games with friends, trading games, renting games, comparing how games played on different consoles, and so on. It was through video games that I was able to get involved with social interactions that I might have otherwise been too awkward to manage. Simply put, gaming culture is what helped me find a community. I then left the community around 2012 after being tired of putting up with so much harassment. One major thing had changed between the time where I enjoyed gaming culture and the time when I stopped. I started to play games online. Before, gaming culture was confined to small groups of people who I knew very personally, in living rooms or bedrooms or attics or basements. Granted, the settings never particularly shifted, but the introduction of online gaming in my life meant that it was no longer confined to small groups, nor people I knew very personally. Instead, it was, well, seemingly everyone. I'll get to that seemingly bit later, but here I was, faced with the whole world at my disposal, and it only felt natural to do what I had already done: play some games. For a while, I enjoyed online gaming, especially first-person shooter games. I recall very prominent games I played growing up included Team Fortress Classic, Counter-Strike, Half-Life 2 Deathmatch, Garry's Mod, Halo 3, and Call of Duty 4. I also continued playing single-player and split-screen games throughout that time, but as time went on, I started to focus more on online gaming. And I wasn't very casual about it. I took an active interest in games of various kinds for a long time. I was subscribed to PlayStation Underground, PC Gamer, Game Informer. I sat around refreshing pages on Super Smash Bros. Brawl's website, waiting to see new characters being announced. I kept up with all of the news going on at E3. I constantly watched reviews, analyses, and top 10 lists, and kept up with all of the meta-narratives and myths surrounding games like the Triangle Gate in Halo 2, the playable Master Hand in Super Smash Bros., and all of the theories about the lore of games like Shadow of the Colossus and Half-Life 2. If something was happening, I was there. But I lost interest. I lost interest because it just stopped being fun when all of my friends switched to online too, and the intimate setting of a living room couch with 4 controllers shifted to a near constant sound of trash talking. Trash talking is indeed a part of gaming culture as it is with other subcultures, most notably sports culture, but the effect is not equal across the board. For me, it was too much. I'm not saying it was too much to handle, I'm saying it was too much to maintain interest in. I just didn't enjoy playing games when all it would lead to is trash talking. So eventually, I quit online games, and then shortly after, I quit buying new games as new games continued to become more focused on online play during that time. Now, don't get me wrong, I still play a lot of my old games. My NES is sitting under my desk plugged into my TV as I say this, but I'm no longer a gamer in the sense that I no longer identify as a participant in gaming culture. Indeed, I still discuss games on my channel on occasion, and I still talk to people who do participate in gaming culture, but I opted out in 2012 and never really came back. Even though my life is one that explicitly rejects the label of gamer, gaming culture is still relevant to my life in some way. It's relevant in that I used to actively participate in it. I have fond memories of my time involved with gaming culture, and now, in 2017, as a sociology student with a particular interest in sociological issues that affect internet spaces, I can no longer afford to ignore gaming culture like I did for the past 5 years prior. In that sense, I used to be representative of what gaming culture can potentially be, and now I'm an outside observer who has the first-hand experience of my time as an insider. Let's talk about another person who is representative of what gaming culture can potentially be. Let's talk about my own mom. My mom's early days of gaming stem back all the way to around 1981. She didn't play games that much past the early 80s until maybe around 2005 or so, at which point she would play games on a semi-regular basis. As of 2017, however, my mom plays games on a near constant basis. She told me that she plays games while working, while laying in bed trying to go to sleep, in between driving, while sitting at a restaurant. She plays constantly. She definitely plays games more often than I do, and she probably even plays games more often than you do. Even right now, as you're watching this video, my mom is probably playing a game right now. So she's played games for longer and for more time than a vast amount of players. She's also attended multiple E3s and even used to work for a company that had close ties to Sony, and in particular the advertising for the PlayStation 2. My mom also rejects the label of gamer. I asked her why, and she said because there's a lot more that comes with such a label than just playing video games, and that she's never participated in the culture, so she's not in any sense a gamer, or at least doesn't see herself as one. Two people with a long history of playing video games, yet neither of us considers ourselves gamers. This is the first major step in what I want to address. The fact that two avid players of video games have a difficult time conceptualizing ourselves as gamers demonstrates multiple bigger trends about gaming, and I'm going to discuss as many of them as I can, pulling from personal experience, academic articles, sociological theory, and my own independent research, to try to explain why it is that me and my mom can both end up shying away from the self-perception of being gamers while still being avid fans of video games. The short answer, of course, is that gaming is a male-dominated space. So let's talk about how gaming culture maintains itself as a male-dominated space. Here's the part where I cut to the chase and alienate a large section of my viewers by bluntly stating the thesis of this video. Gaming culture pushes marginalized people, particularly women, out of the culture through harassment, bullying, disenfranchisement, creating subcultural norms and values, and mirroring mainstream cultural norms and values that lend themselves well to the domination of both games themselves and the culture surrounding them by men, especially cis-het white men, and at the expense of everyone else. It's a long thesis, but this means that gaming culture, as well as any participant of the culture, including people like my mother and I, who don't even consider ourselves a part of the culture to begin with, are going to be speaking on terms under the banner of a male-dominated space. This also means that all participants of the culture will have some degree of resistance against the status quo of the culture, and will also have some degree of maintaining the status quo. The maintenance of the male-dominated status quo of gaming doesn't just present itself through things like harassment. It also presents itself through the way in which conversations about games are framed, because our perception of games and the culture is skewed by the perspectives of those with privilege in such a way that we inadvertently, as individuals, lend some credence to the privileged perspective even as it's used to justify harassment, bullying, and disenfranchisement. What I just said was very wordy, so let me make this a lot simpler. The world of gaming favors men, it favors white people, it favors straight people, it favors cis people, and it favors middle class and upper class people. The world of gaming is also framed from the perspective of these privileged groups in such a way that everyone who is involved with the world of gaming is going to some degree, see games and gaming culture on similar terms as those privileged groups, including people who do not belong to those groups. We all collectively will take for granted base assumptions about gaming and the culture surrounding it that favor the privileged perspective, even if the privileged perspective is wrong. As such, I want to use this video as an opportunity to examine flaws in the privileged perspective of, in particular, men whose outlook on what games are, what games should be, and who should be allowed to play them does have a major effect on how gaming culture operates. It's because they have such a strong effect that gaming is a male-dominated space to begin with. To undo this issue, to make it so that people like myself and my mom, who are both avid fans of games, can participate in the culture as welcome participants who are seen on equal terms to anyone else, we'll need to first point out the ways in which the status quo of men controlling the culture operates, including not only the actions of men, but also the cultural dialogues that validate and sometimes even abet both the perspectives of men above others and the harassment and bullying that we see in extreme cases with something like Gamergate. Because I have so much to cover, I'm going to split the video into a 9-part series. In part 2, I'll discuss a lot of the academic theory behind patriarchal norms and how they're both generated and reproduced continually through how we as individuals and as a collective group interact with a given cultural space. In part 3, I'll discuss a survey I conducted relating to gamer identity, gender representation in the industry, and experiences with harassment. In part 4, I'll discuss how culture and language operate in such a way that we can construct unsubstantiated common beliefs that inadvertently, and sometimes intentionally, privilege men. In part 5, I'll discuss how the terms game and gamer, as well as hardcore and casual, have been used to create in-groups and out-groups within the space that are implicitly on gendered lines and helped to disassociate women from gaming culture. In part 6, I'll discuss how even the concept of objectivity and how we use the concept to measure the value of games and game development can contribute to these issues. In part 7, I'll talk about games themselves and how gender representation in games furthers the othering of women and also can lead to negative psychological consequences for women who play games. In part 8, I'll discuss Gamergate and how such an extreme case of harassment is enabled by the current status of gaming culture. And in part 9, I'll finally discuss what I feel are steps going forward in rectifying some of these issues. It's worth noting that, while I may pull from a lot of citations and may sound like I know what I'm talking about, this is ultimately a series about stating my perspective, not a series meant to dictate my perspective as fact. I believe that my perspective incorporates a lot of facts and a lot of theory to substantiate why it is that I think the things I do, but that isn't enough to be more than just my perspective. I have my limitations. I'm not an expert in game development. I'm not an expert in psychology or linguistics or sociology, though I do hope to become an expert in sociology someday. I'm also white and able-bodied, so issues pertaining to race and disability are things that I have a lot of limitations in being able to speak on. Going into the future, I would love to hear from people involved in game development, especially women involved in AAA companies. And I would also love to hear more perspectives about issues of racism and ableism in gaming and game culture. So please, those who can offer their perspectives, feel free to get in touch with me via Twitter. Thank you.